Hey everyone, how's it going? Juan Dhas here, and welcome to this week's YouTube lesson. And today I wanted to touch on something that was really cool and actually inspired by a live stream I was doing last night on Instagram. I had a question come in about whether what I was playing was all improvised or it was something pre-composed, and I thought this would be a great topic to tackle for both improvisers and composers, and it's something that I think is really integral to how I think about harmony, and that's just modulation. Now, I've briefly alluded to it in some ways when it comes to the voice leading topics, and a lot of the ways I think about harmony moving and changing is a byproduct of the voices within the chords moving by themselves. You know, if I take a chord voicing and then just move one note, that can take me somewhere else completely entirely, and I'm not really thinking of chord function, I'm just thinking of individual voices moving. So if you want to check that out, go check out the voice leading videos. I'm going to link some of them in the cards. But today what I wanted to talk about were two specific modulation techniques that I use a lot. I use both direct modulations and pivot chord modulations. And I was trying to incorporate that in the intro as best as I could. And just kind of freely float, but also move around as much as I could and whenever possible. So let's get into it. Now, I'm not going to be talking about diminished modulations, just using passing diminished chords or even augmented chords. I did do a video on that a while ago as well. But just to recap, what are direct modulations and what are pivot chord modulations? So a direct modulation is actually extremely straightforward. It's just moving directly to a new key. And to start with that, what I'll sometimes do, just even with the voice leading, and you'll see this as a byproduct. So for example, I could be in C major starting, and then I'll go to A flat over C. And then suddenly I'll feel like I'm in A flat. Right? But I started in C, so how is that possible? It's almost not even caring what's going to come afterwards. It's just making that modulation and then contextualizing what's happened by whatever you play afterwards. So if you're a composer thinking about how can I incorporate direct modulations, those are almost a little easier to worry about. Or even if you're freely improvising, it's a little easier to worry about because you don't have to worry about setting up the modulation. In a way, what you're doing is kind of adjusting a person's expectations, and a listener is going to expect you to go in one way, but then you've taken a complete left turn and the listener has no idea where they are, temporarily speaking. Right? Let's use that example. So I'm in C major, and then I went to A flat. Now, it's a very jarring thing, but everything I played afterwards, at A flat over C, to A flat, E flat over G, and then A flat. So just by playing quite literally just 1, 5, and 1 in the new key, I've in a way already assimilated the listener into thinking they're in A flat for a little while. And then I can keep going if I'd like. And you've almost forgotten that you've made the entire modulation. Now what if I went back to C? Right? Oop. Let's treat this as a new modulation, right? So I've got a B flat chord. Let's say I'm going to go to E flat. So, to understand how to use direct modulations really well, you need to have a good understanding of diatonic harmony, harmony that works within the key. Now, even though the end result is something that really just jumps around keys a lot, I'm able to ground a listener by playing quite diatonically within a key. The freedom to move, that's dependent on your creativity and how you want to get there, and what colors you want to use. So if I want something a little more tense or more dissonant, I might pull the listener to maybe harmonic minor or melodic minor even. And that will have its own distinctive character. But the underlying concept is still the same. For direct modulations, you're just looking to go somewhere. Pivot chord modulations, which I'm going to focus on for the next little while, are a little different. And with pivot chord modulations, what are we doing? We're looking at chords that have something in common. And in a way, you can kind of use this to explain some of what I was just mentioning with direct modulations. If you want to think of it abstractly, like I'm using a modal interchange chord and then going somewhere else. But I'm just going to try to keep this really simple to really illustrate the concept, and then you can take it to wherever you want to go with it. So, pivot chord modulations are entirely dependent on using a chord that is shared in two keys. So for example, let's say I'm in the key of C major. Triads, or you can think of it in your seventh chords or whatever. Now, let's say each one of these chords exists in another key. If you're aware of this, you can take advantage of this in your compositions or take more time and think about it and think of how you'll get there. The same thing applies for your improvisation. Just by moving your chords, how can I phrase this? By leveraging some of the chords in the key, you can determine whether you want to shift directions or not. Now, if I were to think of this as an analogy, I would say if a direct modulation is just taking a complete left turn and going on maybe a journey that nobody was expecting, a pivot chord is kind of a very subtle turn. Maybe you take a back road somewhere, maybe you take a slightly different turn, there's some familiar territory, and then all of a sudden, before you realize it, you're somewhere totally different. So, for example, let's say I'm in the key of C major. I've established that key. Right? So I'm just playing around with the key. And I've just modulated already. So what did I do? I used that F major as my pivot chord. And there was kind of a reason I'm just talking as I'm doing this, because I'm wanting to illustrate how effortless you can make this modulation happen. It's not as direct as the direct modulation, you know, where you can just go and then go to your new key. Here, and now I'm in F major. So what I did was I treated this F as the one chord, and then I went straight to a B flat chord, and then played around in F for a little while. Now where can I take this? So I got B flat over D, right? I'm now in D minor, relative minor. Voice leading, where am I going to go? Back to C. Now let's say I want to go from here to B flat, right? I'm using this with all triads, but then even this can apply with seventh chords. So let's say, okay, I'm in the same thing, doing the same thing. C major. Right? Then I'm going to use this G over B, and I'm going to go what I'm trying to do is effectively, if I'm leading you through this as I'm doing it, G over B exists in what keys? And as I'm thinking about this, now bear in mind it's not a conscious thought. I've understood kind of what patterns I like to choose, and I think of the sound more so than I do the idea. I really want to get that point across. I'm not thinking theoretically. But G over B, or G, your G chord exists in which keys? There are only 3 chords in a major key. So that means if I want to use this and strictly stick to diatonic functions, I can choose G major, I can use D major, or C major. We're already in C major, right? Right? I can do and now I'm in D major. Right? Now I'm going to do the same thing with a different chord. Let's say this D major chord. Again, same concept. 3 keys. A major, D major, or G major. Right? Let's go to A. Right? Now let's say we do the same thing with a minor chord. So I can go to do D major, right? Or let's say I can use this B minor. So I've been in A major for a bit. Going to the 2 chord. I'm going to treat this as the 3 chord and then go to G major. E minor, and then where can I go from here? You see, I hope I'm kind of illustrating my point here. So this has been a concept I've been asked about a fair bit. And essentially what I'm thinking of is, what are my options? When I ask myself, if I want to modulate, where can I go? Now, again, to reiterate, I'm not thinking of this in a very theoretical manner when I'm playing, okay, I'm doing secondary dominant modulation, and I'm going to go here, go X path and Y direction. I really don't think like that. For me, it's very instinctual. But I'm aware of my given paths at any given moment. I can use a secondary dominant and set that up as, a pivot chord. What functions as a secondary dominant in one key could be the primary dominant in another key, right? Or the same thing, a minor chord that exists in one key can exist in the other key, and I'm taking advantage of the function of that chord to maybe lead in a different path. Now, I encourage you all to experiment with this, and most importantly, play around with modulations, but play around with how they sound, as that's going to give you a more natural command of how to incorporate these modulations, or rather how to hear changes in mood and sound, and that'll give your composition and your playing a very different perspective. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson, found it really useful. Please do let me know if any of these ideas have worked out for you, and let me know how you're progressing with them. I really love to see how people take the concept and change it into something that is their own. As always, please do like and subscribe, share the video if you found this useful, and I will see you in the next video.